Alright, now that I'm sort of getting over the sickness that I had going on all of last week, and I'm kind of finding my voice again finally, I'm hoping to get the stuff from last week, like Lightyear and Spiderhead and the Bryan Cranston movie and all that stuff, very soon. But in the meantime, let's of course go into this very eclectic group here. And I think we're going to start with Elvis. And I guess before we go into, like, Elvis himself and the portrayal of him, I guess the first thing I feel I'd want to talk about is Baz Luhrmann just in general. Because there's been a lot of build up to this movie, whether it be, interviews with Butler and Hanks or whatever, reviews that have been coming out, or the cam reactions, whatever it may be. And one consensus, good or bad, seems to be that this is an absolute Baz Luhrmann, because he's obviously one of those directors that very much has a specific style that you could recognize from a mile away, just instantaneously. And normally about that you would say you either love him or you hate him, but I don't really think that's the case with him, at least for me, because there are times where I've absolutely loved him, like Moulin Rouge and his Romeo and Juliet are movies that I love very much. But then, like, his Gatsby didn't really work for me, and it was all the stuff where you could see where the people that don't like him, you can suddenly see kind of where they're coming from and where his indulgences are and his really weird choices are. And oftentimes they're trademarks, not just choices for that particular movie. Um, and it kind of just really depends on, I guess, the experience itself and how it works within the story that it's telling, and if it requires his style in that particular way, or if it's just going to feel like it's overly indulgent seemingly for the sake of it. Well, I don't really like to necessarily put it that way, because whether I love the movies or whether I don't really care for them, it's there's just such an undeniable passion in him as a filmmaker that I struggle to kind of criticize it, but at the same time, there's problems still there that are really visible when he does have them. So, in looking at this movie in particular, where it's been built up that this is him pretty much at his fullest. Like, this is the most Baz Luhrmann movie ever, I think is how Hanks put it. And that's very much the case. And I talked about this last year when The French Dispatch came out for Wes Anderson, and I talked about how Wes Anderson is one of those directors that's extremely recognizable. You know his style immediately. You know one of his movies the second that you see just a frame of it. And obviously Luhrmann's the same way, but with Anderson and The French Dispatch, what I had said was the more he seems to lean into himself and the more he does what it is that he's known for and, like, just doubles down or triples down on it and goes even harder, and every movie now is even more Wes Anderson than the last one. And that's what I loved about that movie, and why I thought it worked was because Wes Anderson's one of those directors that only gets better the more he indulges in his trademarks and all that stuff. In Luhrmann's case, this would certainly be that movie where he seems to have fully leaned into himself as hard as he possibly can. The farthest he's gone, as far as saying, here's all my trademarks, and we're going to just go for it as much as we possibly can. And typically, I would think that that's not a bad thing in this scenario, because Elvis is one of those lives that you would assume requires something this, energetic and vivid and kind of in your face, and just like constantly energetic. Like, there's an infinite amount of energy in here. But there is the case, though, of how long it will take you to tire out. Because I know, like, there's a lot of people that love Moulin Rouge, and there's also a lot of people that, by the time Satine is introduced, Harold Zidler's introduction has already worn the audience out, like 15 minutes in. And it's like, typically, like for Millers, that doesn't bother me. Like I feel like that energy is so alive and so intoxicating that I'm with it the whole time, and it doesn't feel like it wears down. But here, it really was starting to feel its length. But I think it's not necessarily just the energy and the just constant everything in your face. There's also the whole people tend to throw around the word pacing pretty easily, but I think here you can really kind of see very much on display where problems with pacing are going to be for a movie that's like 2 hours and 40 minutes. Because I do know that a lot of people have said that the reason a lot of Elvis movies have been unsuccessful up to this point, I want to say this is the first like theatrically released one we've actually had. Everything else has been like a TV movie or whatever. That one of the reasons that they fall short is because Elvis's life was kind of too big to put into one movie. So you have to like really significantly chop it down and try to fit it all in here. And so, and you would think I think Carpenter's movie was like 3 hours. It was like considered a miniseries or something. But with this, you're 20 minutes shy of 3 hours, which is still quite long. But still trying to cram all this in, so you get these opening scenes where we're cutting back and forth between his childhood and where he sort of found his love for music, and then these early performances where the Colonel found him, saw him for the first time, and they made history from there, basically. And I can appreciate that to an extent, because when you go into a movie like this, you might think, oh, I've seen so many biographies about musicians at this point that I know them every single step of the way. Anytime a musical biopic's going to come out, everybody's going to say, walk hard already, lampooned this, why are you still making these movies? But, so here, it almost seems like it's intentionally trying to throw a wrench in that, going like, by the book biopic, because we're getting these, it's not just, oh, here was his child, here's like his birth, then here's his childhood, then here's his early years, then there's this and this and this, and just in chronological order is the trope. So to kind of get these moments back and forth, where it's the early performances and his childhood kind of blending together here, that is a way to do things quickly and to fit everything in that you can. But where the pacing part of it comes in is the fact that because you're cramming so much into this area and doing it so quickly, that we can watch like 2 minutes of this, of his childhood and his early years, as far as like, trying to develop a music career. And in this 2 minutes where you've crammed all this in, it feels like we've watched so much. It's like, like the Inception thing, the dream logic, where it's like, when you're in the dream and it's like, when an hour has passed, only like, a minute or a few seconds has passed. It's basically that kind of thing. And when that's happening, when it feels like we've got so much already given to us in like the first 10 or 15 minutes, it's a long ride to that 2 hour and 40 minute finish line. So starting at that, but once again, I can see where it's like they're trying to give as much of the story as possible in the constraints of this, movie that needs a theatrical runtime. But it just feels like there's something in the programming here, what it takes you to get to that makes you wonder just how able you are to tell a story like this in these time constraints and not through something like a series or something. And it's like, is the effort gonna be worth it when you get to the finished product? And it feels like a bit of a marathon where you leave the theater after 2 hours and 40 minutes and feel like you've binged an entire series. That's kind of where the movie just kind of ends up falling short in general. Like, it's not really, I mean, yeah, and it is the point that it does wear you out with its style, and it's like even if you love Lerman's movies also, this is, I'm almost positive, the longest one he's made, and there's not really much downtime. There's like one scene where it slows down, and it's your generic biopic scene. It's the scene where Priscilla's leaving, and they have and there's that, and it's like by the time it gets to that point, that should be, you know, a big emotional moment and stuff like that. But number one, it just kind of feels like a standard biopic scene, and that's the thing too about these biopics is it's like you can say that, but it's like that was still the person's life, but and it feels kind of insulting to say, well, when you see all the other musical biopics lined up, you're basically just saying the person's actual real life was a cliche. When they all clearly had their individual talents and individual reasons why they stood out in history, and became these figures worthy of their stories being told in such a big, grand fashion like these movies are, but especially this one. But it's yeah. At the same time, though, at the end of the day, it can fall on, I guess, the filmmaker more than anybody else. When you can walk away saying, "I've seen one musical biopic. I've seen basically all of them." And there's another thing about this movie that falls short when many of those movies might not. I remember one complaint with Bohemian Rhapsody that I constantly heard, which is a movie I like quite a bit, actually, was that they were too reliant on people loving Queen's music. And it's like, so they just put all the Queen music in it, and that's what they say, like, that's why it got the Best Picture nomination and stuff like that. But then you turn around, and this movie doesn't really go that direction. Like, it's not a movie that relies on you having a love for Elvis's music for a number of reasons that might seem like not so great choices for an Elvis movie. Because for starters, most of the performance scenes, there's a couple of scenes that really show, like, just how frenetic the energy was at his concerts, and how there's one particular concert scene that's, like, anxiety inducing because of how out of control it gets. Well, the one where the colonel goes to his parents and says, "You guys might want to get out of here before this goes off." And so stuff like that, where you feel like you get kind of a full performance, or you get at least the feeling of some sort of feeling of what it might have been like to have been there, through the frenetic energy that the movie has. But a lot of it's like really cutting, like he'll perform just a little bit and they'll like cut around it, it'll be cutting to other things, or whenever you hear his music in the movie, it'll be like tweaked versions of those songs that you get little snippets of, but they have like sampled music in the background because of this whole thing of one of Lerman's trademarks is bringing in the modern despite telling his, you know, stories of the past. The anachronistic choices, that's the word I'm looking for. And that's another thing too, though, is that it's a movie about a musician that has an endless catalog of songs, that he's credited with, that he's performed, that people know. And so Lerman bringing in the modern music seems a bit off. It kind of feels like it's taking away a bit from what the focus of the movie is, which is the musician that's here. So you get stuff that like would be really at home in any other Lerman movie. Like the very interesting choice is, and if I hadn't heard this song so many times, I don't know that I would have even noticed this is what it was. But the first time he like performs and we like really see it, and he's moving and shaking the way that he does, it starts playing the guitar solo part of Gary Clark Jr.'s version of Come Together that he did for the theatrical cut of Justice League. That was quite a random choice, and it's like, and you hear those throughout it, where it's just these sort of random song choices, and it's like, I can get that in any other movie, but when it's an Elvis movie, it's kind of weird how much of the music isn't his. And when it is his, they're almost like it's almost like there was a rights issue or something, and they're like skirting around it. Like I said, where you only get tweaked versions or you get little bits of performance, with only maybe a couple of scenes. And a lot of the time it's Hound Dog too. I feel like Hound Dog was here at least 3 or 4 times, when a lot of songs weren't at all, or they were barely here. I don't know, it just feels all over the damn place. And you want to talk about taken away from Elvis. it's also a really interesting, and I don't know exactly. I'm not really using interesting in a positive or negative way there. Just a. I'm curious where this choice came from. The idea to basically tell the movie from the Colonel's perspective, which I'm sure Elvis fans will just love. So that seems a little ballsy, but yeah. So this idea of seeing it from his perspective, and when he's basically like in his like dying moments, and he's looking back on everything, and he's narrating, and he's telling us all this, and it feels like so it feels like there's a bit of a distance between us and Elvis for a lot of the movie because of this. So it's almost kind of by the time it gets to scenes like the scene where Priscilla leaves or something like that, or when he's with his mom or something, it feels like we're watching like from a distance because of this setup, and it's like we're watching somebody that we only are seeing through the Colonel's perspective, and like I said, it just somehow feels like we're far away from the whole thing, and we do get some good moments at the beginning, like when they're at the carnival and you have like their sort of deal with the devil thing where they play him up really sinisterly, despite the fact that he comes in saying, "Well, people think I'm the villain, but this is my version of it." But then there's a while. By the time we get in like the last 45 minutes or so, it almost kind of felt like they abandoned. Like when they came back at the very end and sort of reminded us it was from the Colonel's perspective, it was really jarring because I'd kind of forgotten. So it's so many weird choices went into this, and I don't know how we're supposed to feel about it. But that was kind of the bummer, was the lack of Elvis's music, it being told from the Colonel's perspective, and just the constant flashiness of it, just wearing us down really quickly. When we've got so much movie to go through, the whole thing felt so far away, like emotionally and otherwise, and it's like it basically feels like there's no, it doesn't feel like there's any time to retain anything that you're looking at or that you see, like any sort of emotion that comes, or any sort of feeling, or just sort of the sort of visceral feeling or the excited feeling of the concert scenes themselves, and when it's kind of putting you, like I said, in every now and then we have this really frenetic moment that kind of gives you the vibe you should probably feel. It's so there's just nothing sticks. It feels like everything is sort of floating by very quickly. Like you're watching the whole movie and fast forward, and just like everything is a constant transition to the next thing. And like I said, I can understand that from the perspective of like because somebody like Elvis, who not just because he really didn't live long, but the fact that when you have that lifestyle, that's basically what life is and how quickly it moves. But I mean, once again, this is a 2 hour and 40 minute movie about a guy that we should probably be kind of connecting to as the story's being told, and watching it on fast forward isn't really giving us that. It gives us glimpses of what the fastness of his life might have felt like, but I kind of feel like the heart of it should be the guy himself, and him, and not the guy we're getting the story, the perspective we're being told from. So I don't know. As far as performances go, Hanks does find a balance. I could see people being put off by like the makeup and the accent and stuff like that, but I do think Hanks really captures something here where it is like this. I don't think the line is as fine as they want it to be, as far as like, is he a villain or is he just a business guy and this is the way he went about it. There's plenty of times where they make him out to be pretty sinister. And so Hanks is like kind of seeming like trying to find this balance of just being this is just how I feel I have to do business in order to succeed, and I'm going to do anything I can to make that happen. And it's like I said, by the time he's really starting to fuck Elvis over, there's just such a disconnect to any of that there could have been anyway. Like any of that, being able to see it from both sides of the Colonel kind of thing. That never really came through, but I don't necessarily think that falls on Hanks at all. I think that's just the way the story's being told is just so weird from the get-go. that there was only so much Hanks could do, and what he's able to do like through the makeup and stuff like that is still fun to watch. Just an actor like him in general, and being able to still see the different things that he can do. But obviously, the person that's the center of attention, and should have probably been the center of attention the whole time, was Austin Butler here, and he was one of those choices where when I first heard the casting, it was like, okay, I'm not sure I completely see it, but alright, we'll see what they do. It's a Lerman movie. I'm sure it'll be interesting anyway. And yeah, he really good. I mean, because obviously you can say, he's... Because I would imagine it's extremely, like, unfathomably difficult to play Elvis without just coming off like one of the millions of Elvis impersonators that are just out there. Like, the fact that that's just a whole thing and, like, a whole culture in itself seems like it would make playing Elvis in a movie that's taking it completely seriously, telling his story, and making him, like, a real person inside and out, not just his, stage persona. That would be extremely difficult, and Butler does go through, like, the an acting gauntlet here, where, yeah, he's got to do the stage stuff, but he's also got to do he and Priscilla's love story isn't extremely prominent, but it is there, and you've got the emotional stuff with his mother that comes in and out, then you've got the scenes where he's getting lost in the drugs, and he's kind of getting lost in the fame, and then there's the stuff where he's, getting lost in the women and having to make, certain decisions that might ruin his, personal life. And then when it's just kind of full-blown anger by the time the Colonel gets to what he's doing, and he starts to find out about it, there's a lot of stuff that Butler has to do as an actor. Like, pretty much everything. Like, yeah, there's, playing Elvis on stage, and then there's everything else. There's a lot that goes into this performance that he has to do. All of which while maintaining the aura of this person, this bigger-than-life person that everybody recognizes immediately, and has to make that person as human as possible behind this magnificent persona that everybody knows. And... yeah, and to be able to do that, like I said, it's really no wonder that when you hear his process and how just, like, exhausting it was. Now, apparently people are all over this thing where he's, like, still kind of carrying the Elvis voice, and people think he's doing it just to do it. But it's like, I think people tend to forget that whole story where Gary Oldman had to go to, like, a voice coach or an accent coach to get his own British accent back because he had done so many voices throughout his career, and how that's, when you're doing that for that long a period of time and you're that devoted to it, that it is actually a thing to have to shake off a voice. So I feel like that's something that I totally buy. So I just kind of wish that this felt more like an Elvis movie, I guess. Like I said, I guess it gets his essence, in a sense, but it being about the person even more so as well, without being so fixated on the flashiness and other characters and telling it from a different perspective and not making him feel so distanced. I'm getting exhausted just trying to... I felt exhausted when I left the theater. I felt exhausted when I had been in the theater about halfway through the movie. And I feel exhausted now trying to relive it all real quick to get all this out. So, like I said, it's a Luhrmann movie. It's got infinite energy, but it's also a lot. And I do get also that, Luhrmann tends to take his stuff, and whether it's a real story or an old fictional story, that Luhrmann's movies have this sort of fairy tale vibe to them, and I get that. And it's kind of cool to get that with a story that's, like, actually real and a person that's real, because it's a life that that a regular person just cannot even imagine living. So it does fit. There's, like, Luhrmann really does fit this material, but at the same time, I don't know if it was the movie for him to completely go all in on all of his trademarks and all of his indulgences. despite, like I said, despite the fact that it seems like that would be appropriate because of Elvis and his lifestyle and his whole, like, the way his fame was, where you see these girls wherever they would go to his concerts, and you literally see them, like, it's like they become possessed. And it's this really wild thing. And it's like there's stuff in there where you can really get the sense that they captured exactly what they were going for. And then there's other stuff where I just have no idea what the fuck they were, what the fuck he wanted to say, or how he wanted to say it, or what they were trying to get to. I don't know. It's very, very busy. And there's all, and like I said, they throw pretty much everything, including the kitchen sink, in. There's the whole thing where it talks about his love for comic books as a child, and so there's one sequence where we get, a fantasy sequence through the, like, comic book imagery, and they threw everything visually that they could in. And like I said, I know it's what you expect from Lerman, but holy shit, I'm tired. So, so that's unfortunate, because I can't say that, like, I recommend it. But it's, like I said, there's moments in there where I get it, and like I said, I feel like it was in the right hands on paper, but with the way the movie is as is, in the form that it's in now, and the execution that it has, I don't know, it feels like a very long experience. When I came out, somebody asked me, how was it? And that's all I could say was long. It's long. And that's not great. Especially for a movie that so much happens in. So, that's basically what I take away from this. So that's the best I can do. So let's go on to The Black Phone, a movie I've been hyped about for quite some time. Maybe after coming out of it, maybe I was a little too hyped for it. You maybe, if you haven't seen it yet, you may want to tone down expectations, because I know the reviews are really good too, and there are some like festival screenings seemingly a long time ago that got really positive reactions. And the short story I'm very much a fan of. So, and then obviously Ethan Hawke's like one of my favorite actors right now. And Scott Derrickson, of course, and he and Scott Derrickson are reuniting after Sinister. And Sinister scared the absolute living fuck out of me. I still have never rewatched it because I'm kind of terrified to. I don't want to go through that whole thing of... That movie took me like a week to shake off, and I just... and having to do that again, I just don't know if I'm ready for. So... yeah, all those reasons are positives of why I was so psyched for this. Like I said, any shortcoming that this movie might have could just be me overhyping it to myself. So if I feel slightly underwhelmed by this, I'm going to put that on me. Because it is as well made as I was hoping it would be, as well acted as I was hoping it would be. And it stuck to the story very well. But the one question I had was, the movie's an hour and 42 minutes, it says. So how do you take a story that's 20 pages long and make it an hour 42? And so you add things. And typically that's like, oh, you have a thin story, so to just pad the runtime, you add things. No, this movie was very careful about what it added to the story itself. And everything is like... we get enough intro... that the moment the short story begins is if I had to estimate, probably like 25 minutes into the movie. When the main character gets taken, it's literally the start of the story. And that's like 25 minutes into this, because we have a lot of build up to the terror that's going on, and this really, thick and creepy atmosphere that's going around the town with this black van that's creeping around with kids disappearing. And the way they really set that up, and the way that all these setups have payoffs, was so incredibly well done. Like, as far as like adapting a story to screen, this is up there as far as like in the last few years at least. The way to go about adaptation and adding things to a story that's already great by itself. That's by Joe Hill, obviously. who is who dropped the king when you see his name on books for obvious reasons. But I mean, Joe Hill definitely has his own voice for sure. But what I actually found really endearing about this was that, and it might sound like, it's you want him to have his originality and stuff like that, and his original voice, and to give him credit for that, which I absolutely do. But what I found endearing was the way they adapted this, because the story feels like its own unique thing that is strictly Joe Hill's voice and nobody else's. But the way the movie's adapted, the movie kind of feels like a Stephen King movie. But I actually kind of like that, where it's like it's kind of combining King's son with him himself. Where we have character, and we do have like some of the King staples like bullies and abusive parents and unexplained mind powers and stuff like that are very King, obviously. Um, but I kind of really appreciated that as a fan of both of them, feeling like it was this sort of combination of things, and it's especially after just having the Firestarter remake was like this movie feels good after that. It feels very soothing after that wound. So we are set in 1978. So they're gonna have a field day with the aesthetics and the soundtrack and stuff like that, which is also very fitting, especially since it sets you in this time where technology isn't what it is now. So it's much easier to get isolated, and play such a great part in this. And it feels like when we see the first kid on his bike and the soundtrack's playing, he's going down the street and all that, it feels exactly like a Linklater movie. And then it only occurred to me like shortly after the fact that like Ethan Hawke is the star of this, and it's like, and he and Scott Derrickson are so close. It's like I get the feeling any Linklater vibes that are in this when we see the kids just kind of running around by themselves is probably totally intentional, if I had to guess. So, and I'm all here for that. And another thing that kind of gave me King vibes, like I said, not to get too hung up on that because Hill's voice is unique, but one of the things I love most about King is how emotion based his stories are, and how like at the core of all of his horror stories there's some very real human emotion or human situation that we all go through that the horror's more or less just kind of an allegory for a lot of the time. And here we have some really great characters, like the main character and his sister. His sister especially. I need to look up that actress's name because she is incredible. And he's very good also. And they have this sibling relationship, this closeness, that's so perfect, especially for this story and the connection that they have and the part that plays in the story. Because typically you see, two siblings in a story, especially a story that's rife with bullies, and you see that one of them is older and one of them is younger, and you kind of just, usually, there's almost always sibling rivalry in movies and stories like this. And to actually not to see just how far away it got from sibling rivalry and how close they were, felt unique in itself and was really great for the characters and really made you care about them in this really big way, especially as the events progress. But there's another character that must have been very tricky, especially from an acting standpoint. Jeremy Davies plays their abusive drunk dad. And if I remember correctly, in the story, they still have both parents. And there's just talk of them fighting in the background. And it's like the family feels fractured. But here, the mom is dead now, and it's just the abusive drunk dad. And in the first half hour or so of the movie, you just hate, like, you're hoping there's a comeuppance for this guy. You just hate him to his core. He's such a piece of shit, the way he treats them. But then just just like somewhere in the middle, Davies finds a warmth that really comes through, and suddenly you like actually sympathize for him. And when you establish a character to sort of be hated at the start, I have a very hard time finding empathy for characters like that, especially when we're like sort of expected to. So I was like really thrown off when his warmth kind of started to come through, and the way he was able to find it in these moments where you can kind of see where he's finding a balance in real time in front of the camera of, oh, is this guy about to go off again, or is he about to be gentle? And it's surprisingly effective. And so when you can find an emotional core like that with your characters amidst a movie that has so much terror in it, it's something that I love so much, and it's one of the things that really draws me to King as an author. And the fact that they were able to translate Hill's story and bring something like that, because I guarantee I'm positive Hill is capable of that as well. It's just the story's so short; it's not really focused on that kind of thing being only 20 pages. So the screenwriters, Derrickson and his co-writer, really fleshing it out in this way and sort of bringing King's strengths into it. Whether that was intentional, that totally may not be intentional. It was just, oh, we need to strengthen these characters. Here's how we do that, is what it could have been. But I feel like, even if inadvertently, I feel like it's very, the way I described it before, kind of endearing how it almost feels like King kind of works his way into this. So then everything starts to go down. Like I said, when we're about it, I mean, it's happening throughout, but it's sort of like at the half-hour mark is when the movie becomes what people, I imagine, are expecting it to be. Very, very terror-filled as we get these close, because the way we see Ethan Hawke throughout the movie is so, like he's always wearing those masks, and we kind of see him he's always like this distant figure. Really amazingly shot, bringing this up, where it's almost kind of like nightmarish, but not nightmarish in the over-the-top way, but nightmarish in the way of the nightmares that feel really real, where you wake up sweating because they were so real. These scenes feel like that. And another thing they do really well with the imagery, here goes my fucking voice. Let's see how long it lasts, because we've still got one more movie. When the sister has visions, and when we see these visions, they play it up like it looks like it's on film, like it's like old home movies or something. And when I say that this is from the people that made Sinister, and I talk about home movies, you know how how much they found how terrifying this aesthetic can be and what they can do with it. And it's so well utilized and so just fucking creepy. It's like where you actually feel like you're watching, like, it almost feels like you're watching the tape from The Ring or something, or like another version of it, where just everything, just the sight of everything, even when nothing sinister is necessarily happening, just something about the way it looks is so unsettling. And I love the way they're able to pull that off continuously, if we're talking about both movies. But also the way it's put together as the terror builds, not necessarily just in the cell where a lot of it takes place, but the moment where, like, there's a moment where one of the kids is taken, and like we see it happen, and then it cuts to the phones all ringing in the houses all through the neighborhood, and then it cuts to a TV. It says emergency with an ambulance going by, and it's just a TV show. And it's like all these cuts in succession just really ramp up the terror in such this clever way, and it's almost amusing way by the time we get to the TV shot. And that's worth noting also. I was talking about how incredible the actress that plays the sister is she's kind of surprisingly where a lot of the comedy relief comes from. Because James Ransone is here briefly, and you can kind of get sort of, you know, somewhat comedy relief vibes from him, or at least in a couple of his deliveries there. But I mean, the real comic relief actually comes from a character that's like one of the emotional cores of the movie. And the fact that she's able to pull both of those off so well. So she has some spectacular comedic delivery as well as really bringing in the emotion and the terror into it also. And that's not to take away from the main kid as well, who really plays up the terror and the sort of like devastation of the scenario too, when you're looking at it from a child's perspective and the situation that he's in. They even delve into that a little bit, which is, like I said, bringing an emotional core to horror is something that thankfully we're starting to see a little more of than we used to, mainly through like A24 and stuff like that. But the effective way that you can do that by mixing emotion and horror and setting up one foundation so that the other can have a bigger payoff is great. I love seeing them utilize that because it works pretty much every time. Like, you kind of can't fail if you set an emotional foundation and then you jump into horror. It's gonna be wild. Your emotions and everything in disarray inside you, and it's fantastic for the experience. So talking about the fact that Ethan Hawke is one of my favorite actors right now, and he's an actor that will commit in every single way you can imagine. And here he is playing a psychopath child kidnapper that hides behind these very grotesque masks, and who is also a part-time magician, it seems. and this is so it's terrifying. It's so creepy. And once again, this movie finds ways to keep putting this in every now and then, weirdly amusing. And it's and I'm pretty sure that's like everything about that is deliberate. This isn't one of those movies that you would like. It gets unintentional laughs, at least from me. There's usually some jackass out there, even if it's like the best horror movie ever. Some idiot will find a way to, condescend or whatever. But regardless, what Hawke is doing here also are these moments when he's just with the kid and they're just having conversations. In his deliveries, like, pretty much every line he has, it's unpredictable the way Hawke is going to deliver it. Which is great. Especially for a character like this, that's so terrifying and creepy anyway. Because you never know if it's going to be really soft, if there's going to be maybe an air of tragedy in it, maybe a little bit of mystery, there's some playfulness, and then just when he's really fucking scary. And it's when he's like practically a horror movie monster. And it's like, you never know which one you're going to get when he comes into the scene. And it is, as somebody who loves Hawke so much, I guess I could say if I was let down by something in this, it would be that his character isn't in it that much. Though I guess I kind of got that vibe from the story, where it's like, if it was going to be faithful to the story, that's pretty much the way the movie would be. Especially since he's behind masks most of the time. But I said it's about those moments where it's like it's the shark and Jaws syndrome, where it's like he's not there often, but when he's there, it's guaranteed to be a memorable moment and a memorable scene for the entire movie. So in that way, it certainly works also, and like I said, as a classic way to play up a character that's very scary and intimidating, because it's those moments where when he's not there, you kind of anticipate him. So they play with that a lot, and play with your anticipation and expectations a lot. There's also stuff that this goes into, like, stuff that you may not necessarily expect it to, if you're going in relatively blind. And that's like, if you know... there's so many advertisements now. I know, even though I don't watch advertisements or trailers, I do know enough about what's out there for people that when you go into this, I'm sure you're under the impression that the kid is trapped in this cell with this phone, and the phone supposedly doesn't work, but he can hear it ringing, and when he answers it, it's all the kids that Ethan Hawke has previously kidnapped and or killed, depending on what's happened. And there are these ghostly voices from the other side that are trying to get him out, help him get out, but can only talk to him through the phone. And so the way they've chosen to visualize this, by having the kids there with their whatever death mark they went over with, appears, it's sort of like kind of reminds you of the ghost in The Sixth Sense a little bit. But to actually kind of physically put them there. But the great thing they really did here, that's an incredible detail, is even though the kids are here in like this sort of spectral form, and they speak to him as they're speaking to him through the phone, the audio is just like the phone audio when they speak to him, which is really unsettling but also amazing, and very creepy, obviously. There's some very, like, even for the movie you're going into, there's still some surprisingly creepy ways that they visualize the kids that are helping him. One in particular that's much like Sinister itself. That's a visual I'm going to be trying to wipe out of my mind when the sun goes down in a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to be a long night of no sleep. So, and bravo to the movie for that. It's like I fucking hate being creeped out enough by movies that nighttime gets scary and I don't want it to come. But you've got to applaud the movies when they do that. That's their job, and when they do it very well, it's a rush. It's like a roller coaster. When you're in line, you don't want to be on it. When it's getting ready to go, you don't want to be on it. You're too scared. When you're on it, you're absolutely terrified. And then when you get off at the end and you're safe, and it's like that was a good time. It was fun. Might go again. I don't know. So I can very much appreciate when movies are able to pull it off. Horror movies in particular. I also like some of the mysteries that it leaves behind. I could see people probably complaining. They probably call them story holes or God for fucking bid plot holes because nobody knows how to use that term. No, but just things that don't really have answers that aren't really necessary to be answered in the story, so they're just not. And I also like the idea that we don't know who Ethan Hawke's character is. He's just called the Grabber, and that's what he does. That's just his existence. Is kidnapping and killing children. That's just what he is. And it's like that's the thing. That's when you know there's a great horror, as long as it's done right. Horror where not everything needs to be explained. That's why I think two of the best horror movies of all time are The Shining and the original Black Christmas. Is as long as it's well executed, the scariest horror is the horror with no explanation. Where it just is. Like, whatever the scary thing in the movie is, or the evil is in it, when it just is, with no explanation, it just exists. That's the really, really scary shit. And the shit that can feel really real, also, because you feel just as disoriented as any of the characters. Putting you right there in those positions. And I love that there's stuff in this area where you can say, well, I wonder why that is, or I wonder what the purpose of that or whatever is, but it's not something that needs to be answered for the story. And you can just kind of sort of take that away, and it like starts to open up these doors in your mind and these paths that you can go down and like wonder why that was, or why this character said this, or what this character meant by this, or whatever. And that's really fun to take away as well. So, is that might be about it for this. So yeah, it's definitely something that I want to see again for sure. But like I said, I do feel like it didn't. While there's not a lot bad I can say about it, it is that case where I do feel like it somehow didn't reach the hype that I had it at. But like I said, that could just be a me thing. I had it so impossibly high that it just feels like this was very good and not something that I'm like, running out of the theater cheering about. But something that I really, really, really like a lot. So now that everything's on the table, I'll be curious the next time I see it, how excited I'll be, which will more than likely be sometime in October probably. I'm assuming the Blu-ray will be out by then. I hope so, because this would perfectly fit in that time frame. So before my voice goes completely, let's end on Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe. A movie that I think we all only just learned the existence of kind of recently. Like, they kind of just dropped it on us. And a lot of people were like, oh man, it's been so long, is it going to be the same? And it's like, oh, this probably isn't going to be that great and all that. But as soon as I saw the poster and learned of the movie's existence, I was hyped. Because people seem to forget about the reboot in 2011. I think it was 2011, where Beavis and Butthead came back for another season. And they had like sort of like the videos they watched were updated, and they didn't just watch music videos, they watched like the reality shows and stuff like that. And I thought that one season in 2011 was just as funny as the whole show had ever been. So it's like, yeah, if we're gonna get more of that, where it's like where they're still the characters that are exactly the way they are, that have never changed, and it's the same immature sense of humor, and they're just in another scenario. Yeah, I'm totally down for this. And I'm so glad that I went in with so much positivity, because it paid off. This is really, really fucking funny. And I'm so happy.
I was a little concerned at first because I don't know if they've changed it now, but there's an opening credit sequence, a kind of quick one, and I saw that the directors were two names that I did not recognize, and it was weird because after it was over, I looked it up, and IMDb had it listed as Mike Judge was the director. Google had it listed as Mike Judge as the director. When I started it, I assumed Mike Judge was the director. Wikipedia was the only one that had it. Those two names, whoever they are, and that was a bit of a concern. But like it feels exactly like you would want it to feel. They're still exactly the same characters in exactly the same place, with exactly the same mindset. Just getting themselves into the biggest misadventure they've gotten themselves into yet. There's still a lot of echoes here of Do America, where it's like, the government's after them again, and there's the whole thing is set off by a very similar misunderstanding that they had with Demi Moore's character in Do America. And it's so all of it might seem like it's sort of, recycling a little bit, but it never really felt recycled. It just felt like, if anything, it felt, like how there's the difference between a joke being recycled and a running gag. When you look at the show, and then the movie, and then the reboot season, and then this, anything that feels like a joke or a setup we've seen before just feels like a running gag. It's like, of course this would happen again. and I love it. And it's like I said about the reboot season, to me, it's just as funny as it ever was. And you have no idea how pleased I am to say that. And we actually me and my brother did a video where we talked about Do America, and we talked about Ebert's analysis of it, because obviously critics praised Do America, and they're praising this too, which makes me very happy. And Ebert really went into the idea of how making smart movies about idiots. And so, all the immature humor here somehow feels elevated. Like, immature humor coming from Beavis and Butthead is 1,000 times funnier than if it came from any other characters. And it's... and there's even, look at Butthead, specifically. So, when you talk about, knowing these characters and knowing the jokes, Butthead is a character in particular that I feel like is unlike any other comedy character, or at least a very, very small, minuscule group of comedy characters, where they are funny before they even get to their jokes, because we know them so well. And the anticipation to them making their joke is even funnier than when they actually make the joke. One example being, at the beginning, they go to the Johnson Space Center, and there's a shot of them walking, and Butthead's in the front, and they pass by the sign that says Johnson Space Center. And because we know what Butthead's gonna say, the anticipation... it's like, we know what the joke is, we know exactly what he's gonna say, but the anticipation of us waiting for him to notice the sign so he can say it, that's what's really funny. And it's like, it's so interesting how it can be funny before it even gets to the joke, and the anticipation's even funnier than the joke is. And it's... it's like, how many characters can you say that about? And Butthead will always be one of those characters. Every time. There was a moment in Elvis. Because I watched Beavis and Butthead this morning before I left for Elvis. So I was already in that mindset. And there is a moment where they go to a stadium or some kind of venue in Elvis, and I can't remember the name now, it's something Wood. And as soon as I saw it, I just immediately heard Butthead in my head just saying Wood. And it's like, that's what these characters do. That's how they find a way to make their immature humor work. And it's in the fact that they can still do that after all this time. Especially with the way things have evolved. And they find different jokes to make. Because another thing that I really love about this movie is how it's not reliant on the things you would think it would be reliant on. Because the setup that we have now, because the thing about this is, it's not just, you know, one funny thing happens, then another funny thing happens, or a situation here and a situation there, and so on. Everything in this movie is one thing leads to another, to the end. And so, and with that in mind, the setup being that it starts in 1998, which explains why they're still teenagers, in 2022. But then, through a series of events that you just have to watch unfold, they end up in space and get sucked into a black hole, where they get dropped into 2022, and so you see that, and you immediately think that all the jokes are going to be based around the fact that it's Beavis and Butthead trying to come to terms with the changes that have happened between 1998 and 2022. Mainly, you know, technological ones or whatever. And while there is a continuous bit with them with a phone, they find different ways to make the phone jokes funny. But apart from the phone that they carry around the whole time, and they don't really, like I say, they don't rely on that. There's not really much, like, anything that pertains to them going from 98 to 2022 is mainly more for story purposes than joke purposes, which was very surprising. And like I said, and while it may seem like it'd be a played out thing for them to, the way they work a phone, I think one way they kind of stepped ahead of this was that they seem to accidentally use the phone well. Where, like, somehow they get the GPS set up in a way we don't see. They can't read it worth a shit, but they get it set up somehow. And then there's a whole bit with Siri where Beavis has a bit of a her situation. And it's, yeah, and there's one joke about TV shows that's so fun, where he doesn't realize that the camera in the phone is a camera. He thinks it's a TV, and they're watching it, and then some accident happens in front of them, and Beavis says something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, the show really kicked in at that moment. I'm glad we stuck with it." And it's and it's like the way you stick with, like, these TV shows that get started so slowly and then the way they turned that joke, this slapstick joke, into that moment, that joke about getting into a TV series, is incredible. It's so well written humor, and it's being delivered by characters that are complete dumbasses, and that's their whole thing. That's their whole personality, is how fucking dumb they are. And yet they just keep finding smart jokes to do, and that's why that's why we love these characters so much. And the fact that they don't change is what makes them so worth coming back to, whether it be the '90s or 2011 or now. It just seems like they always work, as long as that writing's going to be up to par, as long as we have Mike Judge, I guess, and. Yeah, like, talking about it, like, also things that they could be reliant on that they aren't. There's some multiverse references in this, and you might think that that's, you know, oh, multiverses again already. But no, there's only really one sliver of a thing going on here that even is involved in that, and it's just being spoken about to us. It's not like going through multiple universes or anything like that. And then that has, you know, a payoff or two throughout it. that's really great. Another thing that I really love that they showed restraint on and not relying on a certain joke was that there's only one Cornholio scene. And I feel like that's something where, because obviously, you know, Cornholio comes back a lot in Do America. To the point that, like Beavis is Cornholio through the whole climax of the movie. But that actually worked because of what was going on, because they thought he was a terrorist. But here, it's like, I love that it shows restraint, that they've shown that you could rely on, these are such weird sentences to even be saying, they could rely on Cornholio so much and fall back on that so much, but that they only used it for one scene. Like, I loved how much they just weren't reliant on the things that seemed like so obvious. It's something that definitely a shittier version of this movie and shittier writers would have just immediately said, oh, let's just keep doing this thing. And that's, like, never present in this movie. It's always, like I said, it's always going from one thing to every situation goes to another one, and there's always another joke on the other side of a joke, and it just keeps going. And we actually get one scene that I don't recall us ever getting with Beavis and Butthead before, where they get like a breakup scene. And what's really interesting is not only is it funny because of the way they like, especially the way Butthead's like taunting Beavis, but the way that they argue actually felt authentic. Like it's not necessarily trying to be serious, because there's funny things in the little sad montage as they part ways. It almost felt very, very much like a Flight of the Conchords montage or something. But when they're fighting, it feels weirdly authentic. Like it feels like this is the way kids would fight and kids would argue because they are still kids basically. Um, and it's so that was surprising in itself. I will say, and I don't want this to sound like more than it is. I was just kind of surprised. I kept getting reminded of Bill and Ted 3. Like, this has a lot more in common with Bill and Ted 3 than I would have guessed or predicted. Not even sure why my mind would go there anyway, but this is like so much better. like I said, the jokes are like always hitting, and it's and like I said, every now and then they actually find this weird authenticity in there that I don't know that I've associated Beavis and Butthead with before, and you would think it would be kind of out of place, but that's the thing is, like, it never sacrifices the humor. The humor is always there no matter what, and it's... So the important thing is how funny it is, and it's just as funny as it's ever been, which is all I could certainly ask for. So, that's... Yeah, so I'm just really enthusiastic about this. I love it. Like, anything Beavis and Butthead related, I'm just really... They just make me happy. So thank you, Mike Judge, for bringing them back again. It's always a reward. So so yeah, I guess we're done here for this week's movies. I'm leaving for a week, starting in a couple of days. So I'm trying to figure out if I'm gonna try to squeeze in the Lightyear stuff now or what, but because it'll have to be very soon if I do. So we'll see if my voice wants to hold on, because we've got 2 more videos coming up on Monday and Tuesday, so the all of us, so there's that, and then we'll see what happens from there. We've got Thor coming in a couple of weeks, which is going to be fun, I'm sure, and in between is Minions, which I'll still be gone by then, so I'm not sure what we're going to do about that, but whatever. I'm not in a hurry. So, but yeah, so regardless, the summer will continue, and we'll get more big movies, and we'll talk about those as they come out, and we'll see what everybody else kind of does in between on the channel. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.